Advertisements. Who doesn't love them? There's nothing like getting home from a long day of work, cooking up some food, turning on your favorite show, and bam! Commercials right there. Sometimes I just like to mute the show I'm watching until the ad break comes on. I wish I could just watch this goddamn Wingstop No Flex Zone commercial instead of having to watch whatever the hell this is. And back in the day, it used to be the reality. There used to be a time where you'd flip to a channel on your old tube TV, and for 30 whole interrupted minutes, you'd get to enjoy the marketing genius as a product and all of its uses and abilities would be pushed onto you in what was called the infomercial. Now, infomercials have been around since the mid-1900s, and during their time in the media environment, they've evolved a bit, but always have had a few things in common. Of course, more than anything, infomercials were focused on one thing: pitching a product. And not usually in the traditional sense. No, this was the equivalent of letting a door-to-door salesman into your living room. And many times, these commercials would have a salesman directly pitching to you with a direct call to action to pick up your phone as soon as humanly possible, or else you might miss out on a fantastic deal that typically includes the duplicate of whatever you're ordering, because one is obviously better than two. I mean, come on guys, it's a basic math here. But nowadays, the infomercial seems to all have but vanished, or at least that's what they've been telling us. But what if it has once again simply evolved? What happened to the infomercial? Where did it all begin, and where is it today? Sit back, relax, and try not to fall asleep as we discuss the age of the infomercial. Now, where else would we start but, the beginning? In 1921, a man by the name of William Grover Bernard founded the Vitamax Corporation. At the start of it all, it wasn't much, but from here, Bernard would travel the U.S. as a salesman, attending fairs and events, selling items like can openers and other kitchen appliances. Now, during this time, although there wasn't that many details that I could find online, he supposedly had a close family member with a chronic illness that he and his family were able to slowly treat by helping them obtain a much more nutritious diet, which would inspire Bernard to shift the focus of his company to spreading the gospel of health and nutrition. Around the same time period, however, the Depression would hit, resulting in Bernard sinking into $10,000 of debt, the equivalent of almost $200,000 today. But this would not stop this man's drive as he continued to work his way through the country selling a variety of appliances as well as vitamins due to his newly inspired focus on healthy living. And I suppose we have to hope that the vitamins he was selling weren't of the, snake oil variety, but either way, due to his skills as a salesman, Bernard was able to claw himself out of debt. And in the late 30s, while Bernard was traveling the country for his pitches, he would stumble across for the first time a unique blender, and after a conversation with his son, he would eventually decide to launch a blender of his own called the Vitamix, which was met with great success at events as the blender was able to encompass a foundational part of what he believed to be a good pitch, showing audiences not only how easy a product was to use, but how effective it was as well, something we'd also eventually see as a common tactic in infomercials. And after the success of the Vitamix blender in a conversation with his son, in 1949, more than a decade after its creation, Bernard's son would convince his father to use the newly growing medium of television as a sales pitch to all those watching on the other end of the TV screen, creating what many would call the first infomercial.
Ladies and gentlemen, in presenting Home Miracles for 1950, I'm going to give you a demonstration of one of the most wonderful machines that was ever invented, the Vitamix machine. Without health, you're a miserable failure. You'll lose your wealth, you'll lose your job, you'll lose your income, and you'll lose your life. And that is that you must, mother, you must change the diet of your family, or America is going blind. Oh, get a Vitamix machine, my dear people. Get a Vitamix machine. Quit kidding your family, mother. It's a sugar that was in the Garden of Eden, made by God Almighty. And when you make these cocktails for your children so that they can take them to school, mother, say, when you put them in the thermos bottle, you be sure that they're sweetened with raisins, and you'll be building red blood.
Damn, so, that was fucking insane. But it seemed to work because the phone was ringing almost nonstop, and in just the Cleveland area alone, Vitamix had managed to sell almost 650 blenders in just one night, making their already successful blender an even greater money-making opportunity. This infomercial would run weekly on a local station, eventually reaching other stations across the country, proving that the commercial had been a massively successful marketing opportunity for the company. Bernard's commercial would introduce many of the hallmarks that infomercials would come to be known for. 1, a 30-minute time block. 2, a leading salesman that would pitch the product to you. 3, a demonstration of the product in action along with its many uses, and 4, a direct call to action for the viewer to place their order. Although Bernard's infomercial had been a success for the company, it wouldn't be the cultural domino that some might expect it to be, due to not only the limited reach of the commercial to only these certain areas, but because more than anything, infomercials were just too long. 30 minutes was a pretty large block of television to buy out, not only because you had to find a station that was willing to broadcast it, but because of the cost as well. Many commercials at the time would instead stick to much shorter commercials, mainly due to FCC regulations that existed to limit the amount of advertising that could be done per hour on a station. But there did exist some exceptions, such as the show Home that would air during the mid-50s, often featuring infomercial-style segments that you might see on a shopping network, where the presenter would pitch a variety of products with a particular focus on fashion.
All for about $4. And Arlene, I guess that just about finishes our list again today.
Other than this, now well-known infomercial star Ron Popeil would also star in this infomercial from the mid-1950s, advertising the Chop-O-Matic decades before achieving true fame in the infomercial space.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to show you the greatest kitchen appliance ever made. It's called Chop-O-Matic.
But yes, unfortunately, most of the commercials during this time period would tend to be 30 seconds to 2 minutes, but occasionally you would get gifted with a commercial that would stretch a bit longer than that. But as the modern era of really any media has demonstrated, the longer something is, the harder it is to keep a viewer's attention. So for the time being, more than anything, Bernard's ad would plant a seed in the advertising space that would take a while to fully bloom. Over the next few decades, infomercial-esque advertisements would pop up here and there, but they were few and far between. Instead, commercials evolved into their own space during this time, shifting away from some of the pitch-style commercials of the 1950s and instead focusing on things like catchy jingles, catchphrases, and short skits meant to advertise a product. By 1960, television had become significantly more mainstream, with 9 in 10 households having at least one television set in America, as opposed to a little less than 1 in 10 in 1950. And by the 1970s, color television had started to become the new norm in most households after seeing a small rise in the 1960s, which would open up a whole new lane for creativity and advertising as television slowly began to take a greater and greater foothold in the advertising market. Although shorter commercials focusing on brand recognition were the norm, through the 60s and 70s, direct response TV commercials did occasionally pop up, instead focusing on directly selling to consumers over the phone, inviting them to pick up their phone and call the number on the screen, which as many were aware would become the fundamental part of the infomercial, with infomercials essentially being a subtype of direct response advertising. Although I do think in a lot of people's minds it can be argued that the direct response TV commercial is essentially what most people imagine as the infomercial. Going into the 1980s is where we'd see the seed planted by Bernard fully bloom into what we know as commercial as today. The infomercial. And like all great things in America, we can trace them back to Ronald motherfucking Reagan. You see, Reagan was all about this thing called deregulation, and the television space was no different. And so starting from his very first term in office, the FCC began to heavily deregulate broadcasting in not just the television, but radio space. The pros and cons of these vast amounts of deregulations can and have been heavily debated, but most importantly for this video, the greatest change we'd see would be in 1984, where the FCC would make what's commonly referred to as the Commercial TV Deregulation Order, allowing broadcasting channels to no longer be restricted on the maximum amount of ads they could share on their networks. So as you might expect, this created the perfect environment for the direct response commercial to evolve into its full 30 to an hour long format as the infomercial. Obviously though, paying for a whole 30-minute advertisement during prime televising hours would be insanely expensive for advertisers. Just landing a 30-second time slot was difficult enough. So just because of this new piece of deregulation, infomercials certainly didn't just spring up overnight. However, a new avenue for the infomercial to truly rise would present itself as technology in the broadcasting space continued to improve. You see, at this time, most broadcasting stations typically had a sign-off time, usually around midnight. One of the main reasons that this would occur was because the equipment at the time usually needed to be serviced, and so the sign-off period for the station would allow employees behind the scenes to fix any technical issues and ensure that the station would be up and running for the next broadcasting period. But as technology improved in the 80s, this wasn't really as necessary as it used to be. But even with this in mind, many stations would still sign off for a period of time, as it was, 1, expensive to broadcast for this long, 2, it was difficult to fill a whole 24-hour broadcasting slot, and finally 3, most people really weren't up at this time anyways, so it just kind of made sense to shut down stuff until more people would be watching. But the improvement of broadcasting technology, along with the FCC's Commercial TV Deregulation Order, would create the perfect storm for not just the 24/7 broadcasting cycle, but for the infomercial. Instead of simply signing off for the night, broadcasting corporations got the idea to instead fill these typically inactive time periods with advertising. This helped get around the issue of the expense of maintaining the broadcast during these inactive periods of the night, as well as providing the content needed to fill these time slots. And so the infomercial would rise to its full glory to take up 30-minute to an hour time slots on broadcasting networks, all for a relatively cheap cost, allowing for advertisers to get their products out there while boosting overall viewership numbers and generating a bit of money for the network. And one of the first to really take advantage of this new market was a man by the name of Kevin Harrington. Now, Kevin might be a familiar name to a few of you. He was one of the original sharks on Shark Tank before he was eventually replaced by Mark Cuban, but back in the early 70s, he was simply a teenager working at his dad's restaurant. After realizing that working for his dad wasn't really making him that much money at only $1 an hour, which was below minimum wage at the time, his dad essentially told him, I'm not going to pay you a fair wage. If you want to go make your own money, you open up your own business. And that's what he did, starting his first business in high school and eventually having a successful HVAC company by the time he was in college. He was a businessman to his core, and one night when he was watching some TV, the station would abruptly go off for the night, leading to him supposedly calling the network to ask what had happened, where he learned that the station really only had the budget to air 18 hours a day, which prompted Harrington to immediately offer to fill the 6-hour empty slot for the station, where due to new deregulations, he would cram full of advertisements. Now, one of the first and most notable product lines that Harrington was responsible for promoting in the infomercial scene was the Ginsu knives. Harrington originally saw these knives at a trade show after a man by the name of Arnold Morris demonstrated the power of these knives by cutting a variety of metal objects. And Harrington was so impressed by the product and its obvious marketability that he was eventually able to get a commercial slot for the knives, and from there, they would become a staple part of the early infomercial scene.
This method doesn't work with a tomato. That's why we use the Ginsu. It's a knife that no kitchen should be without.
Harrington would go on to be a part in the creation of a variety of infomercials through his company, National Media, over the next decade, often crediting himself as the inventor of the infomercial, which we of course know is not entirely true, but I do think we can admit that he played a pretty pivotal role in getting the ball rolling for the industry. And as things headed into the 1990s, infomercials had gone from a niche idea for filling late-night time slots to a foundational part of almost every TV channel. By 1994, it was said that 91% of TV stations were airing infomercials. You really couldn't get away from these things if you tried. Now, due to the rising popularity, the infomercial space gave birth to a variety of stars, some you still probably recognize today. Many of these individuals would get their start through the Home Shopping Network, or HSN, a TV station dedicated to selling people stuff, ads all day, every day. It was great. One of the most notable in my mind was the Anthony Sullivan. After struggling to find a career path as a kid, his friend would take him to a flea market where he saw a man pitching an item called the Washmatic, and for some reason that clicked something in Sullivan, sparking in him the desire to maybe try something like that himself. And so he honed his abilities as a pitchman, traveled from show to show, eventually finding this thing called the Smart Mop that he became particularly fond of, selling them all over England before moving to the United States with the dream of making it on TV. And although at the time it sounded like his parents weren't too happy about that sort of decision, to his credit, within the first 2 years of landing there, he managed to secure himself a spot on HSN, where his first on-air advert for the Smart Mop would air.
It doesn't drip. And to prove it, I'll hold it over my head. You can see, no drips.
From here, Sullivan would go on to be a regular on HSN for a while, running into his eventual good friend and TV legend, Billy Mays. Before getting into the pitching scene, Billy had been pretty broke for a while. After his uncle had screwed over the family business owned by his father, Billy was without a job and was living with his longtime girlfriend, Dee Dee. One night, Billy had the boys over while Dee Dee was out working, and one of his friends made him laugh so hard he drunkenly fell out of his chair into their fridge, causing a massive dent in the thing. And so, a bunch of drunk guys were trying to figure out how exactly they cover up this massive dent in the fridge when one of them found a lime green paint can, which sparked an incredible idea. So yeah, obviously, they started painting the fridge lime green, dripping paint pretty much everywhere, and when Dee Dee eventually got home, she was, of course, incredibly pissed. So she kicked Billy and his friends out so she could cool off, but Billy was incredibly distraught, going to the bar where he sat and talked with his friend, Mikey Jones, who offered to take Billy to the Atlantic City boardwalk the next day to learn the art of the pitch. Now, Billy, being without a job for a while, immediately pounced on the opportunity, as he's been desperately needing a job and felt that it might be the thing he needed to get Dee Dee to forgive him. And from there, he went to the boardwalk the next day, learning the art of the pitch, and the rest was history, as Mays would go on to be very successful in the space before finally getting in front of a camera through HSN, where his powerful voice and screen presence would cause him to become a staple in the infomercial scene.
Hi, Billy Mays here with... Hi, Billy Mays here. 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 Hi, Billy Mays here.
Hi, Billy Mays here for the Little Country Handy Pillow.
Although I focused a bit here on Billy Mays and Anthony Sullivan in particular, mainly because they were some of the ones I most remember as a kid, some other notable names did appear on the Home Shopping Network and other infomercial stations at the time, such as QVC being probably the most notable competitor to the network. The previously mentioned Ron Popeil, who had been doing a lot of direct response TV commercials in the almost 40 years since his original pitch in the 1950s, would also break into the infomercial scene, starring in commercials for a new and improved Veg-O-Matic, the Ronco food dehydrator, and of course, we can't forget Ronco's Showtime rotisserie, which would have Ron give birth to the unforgettable phrase, "Set it and forget it."
Set it and forget it.
Set it and forget it.
You just set it and forget it.
You just set it and you forget about it.
You just set it and then forget it.
You just set it and forget it. Set it and forget about it.
You set it and forget it.
For many, Ron is considered one of the greats in the scene and helped to pioneer the format even before it really had gotten its start in the 80s. And another one of my personal favorites has to be Kathy Mitchell. After pitching products at local fairs, Kathy was able to get in early on the infomercial craze that emerged in the 80s, finding notable prominence in the scene through the 90s as a down-to-earth person who would eventually become well known for some of her more questionable recipes, but either way, I'm a pretty big fan. Hell, Kathy, I'll eat your little ramen pizza thing anytime. Now, outside of salesmen that would rise through the ranks to become TV stars, celebrities would also be commonly featured on these commercials to advertise these products, sometimes completely attaching their name to the product. Now, the most notable example easily has to be the former boxing legend George Foreman, whose grills became arguably one of the greats in the infomercial genre.
Not only does it say lean, mean, fat-reducing grilling machine, what's that?
It has my name on it. And it's very important. When you do something and sign your name, that means you really believe in something.
Yeah.
So this machine was designed with George Foreman and the American people in mind that, hey, we're going to eat what we want, but we're going to knock the fat out.
And it was so great, in fact, it would inspire a wave of copycats such as Hulk Hogan's Ultimate Grill, which was pretty much the same exact thing.
Finally, we've come up with a grill that lives up to its name. It's the ultimate grill, and it's definitely the ultimate cooking appliance.
But outside of just the faces in these commercials, what about the infomercials themselves? Well, because of the typical late night time slots, infomercials had a tendency to appeal to certain demographics and therefore had certain products they'd push more than others. Now, adults were obviously a pretty large demographic that could fit into this, but usually they appealed to older adults, specifically retired individuals or stay-at-home moms, which resulted in a lot of adverts revolving around anti-aging, cleaning, and cooking, with the occasional get-rich-quick scheme. And this trend would continue into the early 2000s as the infomercial became even further ingrained into popular culture. Despite infomercials commonly coming on late at night, oftentimes they'd be cut down for shorter 30-second commercials, which would allow for a newer market to be reached. Despite infomercials commonly coming on late at night, oftentimes they'd be cut down for shorter 30-second commercials, which would allow for new markets to be reached. For this reason, direct response commercials would become particularly common on children's TV stations like Nickelodeon, Cartoon Network, and Disney. Except these commercials usually didn't have the typical 30-minute counterpart that would be seen with other infomercials. One I remember in particular was Floam. Man, I was begging my mom for this stuff.
With Floam in your hands, the fun never stops. Just ask anyone who Floams, from parents to tots. Floam, it's fun you can feel.
Now, knowing me, I probably would have ate this, but from what I could find online, it apparently is non-toxic. But maybe I'll have to do a Floam taste test video at some point to prove it. Also, the fushigi? Man, I was pleading with my mom to get this thing, and only after going to my friend's house one time did I realize it was actually just like a big metal ball. After that, I really didn't want one anymore. But
No strings, no tricks. Magic? Maybe. An illusion? You decide. You can make fushigi defy gravity and appear to float in midair.
As the internet grew more popular, infomercials became a particular target for jokes online due to the ridiculous nature of so many of these actors demonstrating their products.
Tired of looking like a fool when your cakes aren't cool?
They stick to the pan, they flop when you flip, and the yolks always drip. But when it comes to doing it yourself, making a mess with that dangerous knife is no laughing matter.
Everyone loves butter, but getting it out of the fridge, out of the wrap, and onto your food is a real hassle.
Oops. Uh-oh. Look out! Let's face it, getting an ice cube tray to your freezer is like balancing on a tightrope.
Certain infomercials in particular would become incredibly famous online, particularly with my boy Vince Offer. The ShamWow and Slap Chop were probably some of the most watched infomercials of this era.
You're gonna love my nuts. Watch this. It's worthless. Forget about it.
But as much as the internet would be used to share and often make fun of infomercials, the sad truth was the internet also opened up a whole new lane for advertisers. And as we entered the 2010s, we would begin to see a gradual shift away from cable TV, prime real estate for the infomercial, as people began to move to streaming services, and as the 2010s progressed, we'd slowly see infomercials not just fade from popular culture, but from the budget of certain advertisers, as targeted ads on online platforms and streaming services were simply more effective at reaching audiences for a product. In many ways, online reviewers would replace the niche that the infomercial possessed, as not only could you get a comprehensive review of a product and all of its features online, but they felt a bit more authentic, even with sponsored reviews, as there was usually a bit of room for a reviewer to be critical. That being said, the infomercial would still exist through the 2010s era, and funny enough, its one less great hurrah would be caused directly by a YouTuber by the name of Jonathan Tron. John would introduce to the internet a man who embodied the spirit of the infomercial legends of old. A man who captured the artistry of legends like Billy Mays. A man by the name of Phil Swift.
To show you the power of flex tape, I sawed this boat in half and repaired it with only flex tape.
Not only was Phil just a great pitchman and personality, but his line of flex products like Flex Tape and Flex Seal were genuinely impressive stuff, resulting in Flex Seal becoming not just a household name for many, but a very successful product. But outside of this, the infomercial has yet to really make any lasting impact in the modern era. Although infomercials do still exist and are aired on modern cable TV, the market they appeal to is, generally speaking, very limited and only shrinking, as it's really only mainly appealing to older folks that are still watching cable television. Instead of companies with sometimes questionable products buying up cheap late-night ad time, these companies instead now sponsor small creators on platforms like YouTube and especially TikTok to push their products for an even smaller price. It seems that the infomercial is just incompatible with advertising in the modern era for most products, and I'm not sure that it could ever possibly reach the heights that it once possessed. It was really a product of its time. Despite the overall hate I hold in my heart for advertisements, I do keep a special little place in there for the infomercial. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this one. It took a bit to research because, as you might imagine, infomercials were not something that people were really pushing to document and archive, so information online is a little bit sparse, especially in that 60s and 70s era. But I really do love the infomercial, and I've always wanted to make a video on this sort of stuff, so hope you enjoyed. And of course, we've got to give a special thanks, though, to this month's patrons. Mads, Dave the Unknown, Griff, Einar Anderson, Turmeric, Maddie Grady, Zarl Dunking, Kenny, Daddy Am, Bup1, Olafur Consisum, and Dippy Jip. Thank you all so much. In many ways, you were kind of like the sponsors for this channel, so, thanks for the support. And of course, thank you to everyone else for watching. I really do appreciate it. But until next time, take care.